Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Quinn, and I'm sitting in Montreal, and I'm pleased that we're presenting a webinar today with Jennifer from HackerGal. That's a nonprofit based in Toronto, and Jennifer will explain a bit more later. But we're doing week 2 of a series of 3 on video game development. So hopefully you saw week 1 last week. If you didn't, it's recorded and you can review it another time. But today we're doing the follow-on, the week 2 session. And if you didn't have a chance to do the week 1 before, just follow along and watch what Jennifer's doing. And then later tomorrow or the day after, you can go back and try all the neat techniques and things that she's going to show you today. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Jennifer.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer. As Michael said, I am from the charitable organization HackerGal. I am the lead curriculum designer there. And so a lot of my job is to actually play with coding and figure out the lessons and the projects that our organization wants our girls to work with. Last week, we started with our first kind of initial setup of our game that we're working with. And as Michael said, if you weren't here last week, it's probably best that you kind of watch this video for today and learn about the Lynx platform and then kind of try it on your own. Or alternatively, if you look in the all projects, and I'll show you in about 2 seconds, you'll see that I've created a template based off of last week and all the work that we did then. So if you do want to code today, feel free to kind of open up that template and work alongside. I'll show you how to get to it once you're on Lynx. If you are not logged into Lynx, this would be a really good time to do so, just because then you can save your project and save your work as we go along. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Yes. Okay. So you guys should all be able to see my Lynx coding now. I'm just on the main page. And the first thing I want to do is click on all projects. And right below, you'll see that this one over here was from week 1. Okay, so that's everything that we built up to starting from scratch. And now we're going to work off the week 2 game development template. Just click on that and you can press edit. And for those of you that weren't here last week, I'll just kind of do a little bit of an overview of kind of what we covered in that webinar. We set up this game field that you see right in front of you. And we've created such that the pink is our main character, and what this pink turtle is trying to do is basically get to the other side. And so when you press start, what ends up happening is these blue turtles here are actually fixed. They're not moving. If the pink turtle interacts with the blue, which it will not do right now, which is interesting, on touch, that's why. Let me just do this. Okay, if the pink turtle interacts with the blue turtle, which you're going to see that it takes a step backwards, we're going to be playing with that procedure a little bit today and kind of modifying it to see what else we can do in our game. The other thing that we added was a jump button so that we could actually jump over our obstacle turtles and thus achieve the end of the game by reaching here, which will end up just looping our pink turtle. Today, we're going to be going over some really cool advanced features, and I'm going to walk you through a number of different things. If I feel like I'm going too fast at all, feel free to write in the chat. And I know I have a lot of coding angels out there that will help solve your problems. If not, and you're finding it too difficult to follow along, watch this video after side by side and play with the template, because you'll be able to build from there and you'll find some exciting things. So without further ado, the first thing that I really want to do in this game, firstly is press my save button since I made some changes. But secondly, I want to create a new tab. And so how I do this is to click this arrow right here, press add tab, and I'm going to call this my game features. Now, the reason why I'm creating a separate tab, for me, I find it a lot easier as my game gets very complex to organize different codes based on the tabs that you see here. Procedures generally tends to mean, for me, all these major buttons that we've set up, while game features are those kind of cool things that you start to add afterwards when you're thinking about the layers of your game. And so the very first thing that I wanted to talk about with you guys is this idea of kind of creating lists in your project. And there's a really cool way to do that. When I say lists, what I'm saying is that I want to combine these two enemy turtles here into some sort of list so that I can call on that list in a procedure and then have it execute some sort of instructions. So the very first thing I want to do is have a set up enemies kind of procedure. Now, in order to do that, I need to know the names of my blue turtles. If you can remember, one name is Blue, and then for the larger turtle, it's Big Blue. Okay, so just so you can see that there. Next, I'm going to go to the procedures pane on the left-hand side, and I'm going to type to set up enemies, and that's the name of the procedure that I'm giving it. Remember, procedures start with to and end with end. Okay, so before this, I'm going to write the word make. And when I space from make, you'll see that if I hover over this, it shows a really cool tooltip, and it tells me that I'm able to create a variable with words or lists, okay? So what I'm going to make is something called enemies. Now notice how I use this single or the double quotation mark and only one of them before the word enemies. The word enemies is the name of my list, just so you know. And in order for there to be something a part of that list, I need to tell it, well, who are the turtles that are a part of that list? So I'll start with the open bracket on the left-hand side here, and I'm going to type blue for my first turtle and Big Blue for my second turtle. Close it with the square bracket, okay? And I'm simply just going to type this into my command center. Okay, now you'll notice nothing really has happened on the screen. It's not meant to, so don't worry about that. You'll see shortly what's going to happen. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is perhaps instead of having these blue turtles cause an interaction, you know, only when this pink turtle collides with it, what I want to start is adding a layer of difficulty in my game. And to do that, I want to play with these two specific turtles and have them actually moving so that when the pink turtle is moving this way, the blue turtles will come at it also, which requires the user to actually cause a jump in order to move forward, right? This time we'll kind of take those features a little bit more advanced as we kind of go further into this webinar. But for this right now, we just want to make our blue turtles have movement. So similar to before, what we're going to do is start with a new procedure, and I'm going to call this one enemy movement. Okay, and that refers to my blue turtles and them actually moving. And the next thing I'm going to write is the word ask. Now, I want to use the word ask because I'm calling on my specific list. Okay, I'm going to be asking my enemies if they could do something for me. And in order to do that, I want to write enemies. Now, you may be wondering how that does anything at all. Well, you see, we've set up our enemies using the make command. So now, instead of me typing individually ask blue or ask big blue, I can simply write enemies because that is the variable I'm using to kind of quantify that list, to have those two turtles inside of there. After that, I'm going to actually add my movement, but to do that, remember, you always want to work with the closed bracket. So you're going to do the left hand open bracket first, and then you're going to write the word forever. Now, I say forever because when we start this game, we want the obstacles to keep moving. We don't want them to stop every so often and then for us to have to repress the start button. We just want it to keep moving, similar to the movement of the pink turtle. So after that, an important thing that I like to add is always to have the direction that they're going to be heading in. So I'm going to set heading, or set for short. And we know that the pink turtle is facing 90 degrees. Okay, so we want to do negative 90 degrees so that this turtle's nose points in the direction of this pink turtle at all times. So we put negative 90 aside. And then next, what we're going to do is put a forward command. I'll write it in full form here, forward. Now, most people might be thinking, okay, let's give it an actual number, maybe 50, maybe 60 steps. But I want to do something different. I want to add the random command. And the reason why I want to add random is because I don't want this to be a game that people can solve by knowing the amount of movements that the blue turtle goes forward. If it's random, their movement is randomized, which is great for us because then that adds more difficulty to the game. But in order to complete my random procedure, I actually have to add a number beside it, right? So I would say I'm going to put this to 10. So they're going to move up to 10. Okay, random up to 10. And then I'll put a little bit of a wait command in there so it slows them down a little bit and doesn't have them going crazy all over the screen. Now notice that I have put my closed bracket here, but I'm missing a bracket, okay? So there's one way to test if you have the right amount of square brackets in your procedure is to count, and it should be an even number. And if I count here, I see 1, 2, 3, which is not an even number, right? So what did I do? I don't know what I did. Did I do something wrong? I didn't add my second closed bracket, okay? So the reason I say that is because I've started forever over here, and then I started my set heading. So I closed it by using this square bracket, but now I have to close my full procedure by using the second square bracket, okay? Now the last thing of any procedure is always to put end. And as you guys know, it's very, very important for us to actually test whether or not our procedures work. So the next thing I want to do in my command center is type the name of the procedure, which is enemy movement. Press enter or return. And what you can see now is that my blue turtles are moving across the screen, okay, at a random intervals here, forward at a random number up to 10. Now, look what happens. We still have this wonderful on touch command that basically says when pink touches blue, any of the blue turtles, it's going to jump back, keep jumping back. And this may not be as productive for the type of game that we're trying to build. So we need to kind of fix this, okay? And I think that before we fix this, before we create any new on-touch procedure, first thing we need to do is stop it from actually happening in our game. I'm just gonna press stop all. I know now that my enemy movement procedure works the way that I want. The other thing that I really need to do is actually add this to my setup procedure. So I'm just going to do Control C to copy the words. And then right below setup enemies, I'm just going to add a line and put it there. So essentially
Jennifer, can you increase the font?
I sure can. Too small?
Yeah, I think through Zoom, yeah. Much better.
Is that good? Beautiful. Okay. So all I did in that last second is I added the name of our procedure, which we've actually written down right below it. And this is added to my setup enemies. And you can probably guess that I'm going to add this beautiful setup enemies to the earlier procedures tab. I'm just going to copy this. So first thing I want to do is head back to my procedures, right? And if you remember, this is our old on touch event that occurred, right? What it's telling us is that when the pink turtle touches blue, it's going to actually move back 30. Now, what I want to do is, firstly, I'm going to remove that comment and add it up here, and I'm going to say old on touch procedure. Now, in order to make this a comment, you'll notice that this went blue, which means I didn't do something right first. And that's because I didn't add my semicolon. Okay, notice now that it's gone to gray. This means it won't affect any of my code. And it kind of explains that this is the old one that we worked with. The other thing that I want to do is right click on my pink turtle, okay? And what we'll notice here is that it still says blue touch, which means that it will actually end up happening once the game start button is initialized. So I want to kind of take that off for now and press apply. Okay? So now if I press start, you'll see nothing happens. We've removed the on touch event. So the next thing I wanted to show you is to actually add into our begin game the new procedure we created. So remember that I copied and pasted from my game features tab this setup enemies right here. And I pasted it here in the begin game. And it's intuitive to do that because when we press the start button, we want our blue turtles to start moving, just as our pink turtle does. So now when I press this, I should start to see them. Ta-da, it works, which is great. But that's not where our game needs to end. Firstly, if you notice, when I press the reset game button, the only turtle that actually resets is our pink turtle, unfortunately. these blue turtles continuously kind of move when the game starts, but they don't actually go back to a spot. And I think it's important that we think about where our starting positions when the game begins, because, you know, if this ends up colliding with my pink that early, it may not be a fun game for someone to play, and that might, you know, irritate them. So instead, what we want to do is add to our reset game procedure here. And remember how we did it with the pink turtle, right? This exact code that we're looking at here, now we're going to apply that to each of our enemy turtles. So remember, the first name of the smaller turtle is blue, and the second one is big blue. And when I write their name here, the turtle's name, I'm calling to that specific turtle to execute the action, right? So the next thing I want to do is write their set heading. I need to add a space there. Remember, it's -90. Showing you line by line so you can see. And next, we're going to want to set the position. We may not be sure what that position is yet. I'm going to write the code so you can see line by line what you are setting up. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is take a look and make sure your blue turtles aren't frozen. If they are frozen, what you'll notice happens is I can't drag them anywhere, and I want to drag them to set them up where I want them to be. So make sure you uncheck frozen, press apply, and then drag that turtle kind of where you want it to start. Maybe you want the smaller turtle behind. Doesn't really matter because you're calling on a list to move, right? And so I'm going to have my nice bigger turtle maybe right here. And the next thing that I want to do is actually figure out what those positions are so that I can write their coordinates, their X and Y coordinates, directly in the square brackets. So I can look at big blue first or blue. It doesn't matter here because they both will tell me the different values, and then I will use those values. So we can see the X core is -37 and the Y core is -181. So what I want to do is X always comes first. I think it was 37 and 181. And notice that I put this next to big blue because I was looking at big blue. Just double check 37 and 181. Then I'm going to go to little blue or just blue, and I'm going to check. And again, I see the X coordinates and the Y coordinates. Okay. So 190 and -188. Now, we want to test that this reset game actually works. So the best way to do this, I'm going to just drag my turtles somewhere else on the screen, make sure they're frozen, right? You can see now I can't drag them. So what should happen when I press this reset game button is that these turtles will move to these coordinates. And the only way to find out is to press the button. Now, as you can see, now the blue ones have moved into place. The pink one was already set up, right? So now when I press my start game button, you'll see here that if I were to reset the game, again, the turtles will move back to position. If I stop the game, they'll move back to their initial starting point, which is really cool. So what I think is really important to remember here is that we need to think about where we can take our enemies and how much further and what kind of things we can start to get them to do. Because it's only so fun if you have turtles running at you for so long, you're going to want to add more layers that make it kind of more exciting. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a feature that basically allows us to lose lives every time that we touch one of these blue turtles. So instead of moving backwards, we're going to be using a completely different on-touch event to kind of add layers to our game. So what I'll have you do is kind of move back. You can move back to the game features for now. You're going to click on this plus sign or press save first because I have waited too long to press save. Press this plus sign, and then what I want you to do is add a text box. So you'll see that text 3 has appeared on my screen. There's nothing fancy about it. It's a text box right now. It's an empty text box. I'm going to just raise it up here a little bit higher. And what I'm going to do is right click on that text box and rename it lives in capital letters. You can do small letters as well, as long as you go with what you want to see. So you see, once I press apply with the name, it kind of shows up right here below. Now my text box is completely empty. It has nothing in it. And one of the things that's really cool to remember is that when you're using kind of text box or creating turtles, there's these really cool dynamic kind of primitives that start to develop once you've added things into your project. And these primitives can work in the sense that you can set values in them, or you can use them to actually report information back to you. And I'm going to show you kind of how that works. So you'll notice that this is an empty text box, and I'm no magician. I'm just going to code something to appear there instead of me writing it physically. So what I'm going to write is set, and then I'm going to call on the name of my text box, which is lives. And you'll notice that I put it all in lowercase, set lives, okay? And then I'm just going to write something, AKA a number. Notice how this changed. When I press enter, what ends up happening is the number 3 appears in my lives box. And I think probably you're sitting there wondering, is it just going to work for numbers, or can I also do that with text? And you can definitely do this with text. There are definitely cool ways to do it. So instead of writing 3 here, what I want to do is actually add maybe some text. Notice that when I use my square brackets and put text inside of them, then press enter, what I've done is changed what's inside this text box. There's no number 3 anymore. Okay? Now, of course, when we're thinking of lives in our game, hello Jennifer is not going to do us any good, but I wanted to show you kind of that trick to show you just how well this works. Lives is the name of our text box, and if I were to add any other text box and call it something differently, I could still begin it by writing the word set and then actually kind of go from there. Why this is important in our game is because this code right here is basically going to set up our game so that there's lives in the game before we even work with our on-touch procedure. So again, I'll press enter and return that back to the number 3 because I want, you know, every user who starts my game to start with 3 lives in particular. And I'm just going to leave this up here. Now this code right here is actually pretty important to us. Because we want this to show up at the beginning of every game. So what I'm going to do is copy this command, so Control-C or Command-C, depending on the keyboard you're using. Head back to your Procedures tab, and then what you're going to do is add it into your Begin Game procedure at the very top, okay? So now I'll just show you how this works. If I were to set the lives to say, I don't know, 100, which is very, very large. I've now changed the text box. However, when I press this start button, this should turn into the number 3, which you see it has. We haven't made anything happen with that number 3 other than it exists in the text box and it will appear once the start button is pressed. Now we actually want to work with those numbers in there and have some sort of on-touch event to kind of guide what's going to happen in our game. Okay. So what I want you to think of now is we're going to go down to where we had our old on-touch procedure, and we're going to write a comment. And the comment will say new on-touch procedure, just so we can differentiate between the 2 that we've created and see them kind of side by side. The next thing that I want to do is right-click on my pink turtle, and I'm going to add a new on-touch procedure. You can see blue touch is still there. We're not going to use that. Press apply, and we'll see that it's kind of filled out down here, which is not where I wanted it to be, so I will just copy and paste it elsewhere. Right below my comment, I'm going to erase the pre-existing comment that's there. And we see that my new on-touch procedure exists. It doesn't do anything yet, but we're going to modify that and actually make something happen. And the way that we're going to do that is by writing an if statement. So we type if member with a question mark, okay? Now, if you hover over this again, you can kind of see what it's saying is that if this happens, okay, if something happens, then something else might happen. Do some sort of instruction, okay? So if member, and we're going to say touch turtle, because we're talking about our specific pink turtle here. If it's the pink turtle as well as our enemies, so if the pink turtle happens to interact with any of the enemies, and remember enemies is our list, okay, a list of blue and big blue, what's going to happen? Well, we want them to lose lives, right? Let's start this with a square bracket, one word, or one phrase you can say, since lose lives is 2 words technically, but you can't have a space, and close bracket. Now, many of you are wondering, well, how does that make me actually lose lives? Well, the short answer is really that we haven't set up our lose lives procedure quite yet. So it won't make you lose any lives yet, but we're going to change that now. What we want to do is head to our game features. Okay, so notice that all of my game features has to do with my enemies. I can see everything here clearly. The only thing that's really absent is the on-touch procedure, and I like to keep that at the beginning simply because it's a bigger mechanic for me. So the next thing we want to write is our lose lives procedure. So again, we begin our procedure with 2. Write the phrase exactly how you wrote it in those square brackets. If you have any typos, it won't work, of course. End it with end. Now, what we want to do is recall our set lives procedure. Okay, we are asking our text box to show a different number when they lose lives. And how do we do that? We write set lives again, but this time we're going to repeat the word lives. And the reason we're doing that is essentially to say whatever the lives reports to be, which is 3 right now, okay? We want actually to subtract a life from whatever that number is. So minus space 1. Now you see to lose lives, set lives, lives minus 1, okay, end. So next thing that we want to do is actually test, does that happen, right? Does something happen when pink touches blue? Now, firstly, we verify pink touch is actually activated, okay? So technically, when it touches blue, it should lose a life. Now notice how in your text box, it's changed to the number 2, and that's because it's touching blue right now. Now maybe you want to try the other turtle, and you'll see again, the lives went down 1. And I'm just testing this to see if it works. I haven't kind of pressed start on my game at all, but I know now that the procedure is active and running. Okay, and now my turtles have lost a life. But if I press my reset game button, ooh, something happened. Look, I still only have 1 life, which is not how I want that button to work. If I were to press start, however, it goes to 3. So I learned something here, and that's that I have to actually put the set lives feature to my reset game button. Otherwise, it will stay at the number that it's currently at, as opposed to reactivating to the number 3, which is what I want. So heading back to my procedures pane and my actual procedures tab, what you're going to do is find your reset game here. And again, write the command set lives space 3. So now, just to test that this works, I'll lose a life. And when I press reset, the position goes back to normal and my lives reset back to 3, which is great. Now, I'm sure all of you are probably wondering, well, that's great if they can lose lives, but what happens when they get to 0? Does the game still continue? Well, it does, technically, right? And I want there to be some sort of game over that happens. So what I need to do actually is I need to go back to my lose lives procedure and I need to modify it a bit. Okay, so right now we see lose lives, set lives, lives minus 1. The next line that we want to write in here is something to do with an if statement again. We want it to say if something happens or if something is set a certain way, something else will happen. So what I write is if lives, which remember is the name of our text box, okay? And then I'm going to say equal to 0. So what this statement is really saying is that if there's the number 0 in the text box, something needs to happen. What's going to happen? Remember, to actually execute an instruction, we want to use square brackets. So I'm going to use the command stop all and close it. So in this statement alone, what we're saying here is that not only will pink lose a life if interacting or touching blue, but that at the same time, if my lives over here go down to 0, that the game's going to be over. So to test that, again, I can kind of drag my turtle. And you'll notice that nothing happened just simply because I'm not actually active in a game. Easy way to fix this, reset, start, and I'm just going to let my turtle collide with these blue ones to make it go a little bit faster so you see what happens. Notice that the lives are disappearing here. I'm just going to drag it since it's unfrozen. And boom, it stopped everything. The movements have stopped. So we know now that my lose lives procedure is set up nice and well, right? Which allows us to basically end the game in some way. Now, of course, with any sort of game, there has to be a strategy to perhaps win. You don't always want to just lose or keep going forever and ever if you don't have some sort of score that's tracked, perhaps. So what I thought would be really cool is to add a gain lives feature. And what I want to do with that essentially is add another turtle into my actual work area. So I'm going to just save my project so that this code is there. And then what I'm going to do is press the plus sign and click turtle. My beautiful new turtle appears in the center of the screen, but I'm going to make this a little bit more magical because I found clip art in advance to work with. So last time I didn't go through the clip art pane too much because I said that we were going to do some fun things in webinar 3 when it comes to our creative kind of game user design. So what I want to do now is head over there and show you some cool things and how that might work in this particular game. I actually have found a pixelated image of what I call a snack. It's a little flower. And to add that, I simply hover over the box that I want to use, press the plus sign, and I'm going to press select since I saved it to my desktop. Once I press this, it takes a little time. Unfortunately, my internet connection is not as fast as I would like it to be, perhaps. There we go. I'm going to go right to my desktop since that's where I saved it, and you'll see nice little pixelated flower. Just open that and create it in my project. Okay, and you'll see here that it's the number 1. And that number, again, is very important to me because this turtle, I want to put the costume on it. I want it to wear this image and essentially become that image. But remember that turtles aren't in themselves images because they actually can have commands and instructions that allow them to do different things in our games, right? So they're not stamped in any way. Right now, this turtle is actually active and I could code it. So the first thing that I want to do to actually set the shape is use the set shape command. Press space and the number 1. Now that is an awfully big snacking flower that my poor turtle will be able to jump into very easily. So instead I need to kind of work with the size of this. Simple command that I can use is set size. Let's work maybe down to 5. Okay, maybe that might be too small. 10. Beautiful. So I have this snack here that I am working with. I'm going to click back to my procedures pane. And the first thing that I want to set up is similar to what I did with my enemy. I want this snack to not always be in the same place because that makes it really easy for me to kind of gain lives from it if I always know where it's going to be. I love working with the primitive random because it really takes that element of surprise and it heightens it in your game because you as the designer know that it can only go so far and it's going randomized between some sort of number that you've associated with the word random. So what we'll do now is to create a snack procedure. And before I create this procedure, I should be very careful to rename my turtle snack. So right now it's only named T1. Instead, I'll call this snack. Okay, and snack will stay there. So let's begin with a new procedure. 2, and we're going to call this snack movement. Now, just so you know, I like to keep everything one word, but if you find it easier to put an underscore in between those 2 words, feel free to do that. If it helps you to see the text easier, for me, I like it to kind of read one way across. I'm just going to keep it like that for now. So to snack movement, firstly, let's call on our actual turtle, which is the name snack, comma. So this tells me I'm asking snack the turtle to actually do something, or snack the flower now that you see. And from there, I'm going to write the word forever, because again, we want this movement to continue onwards no matter what's going on in the game until the stop button is pressed. Okay? Now, a neat trick that I learned when I was coding a game for my first time is how to work with those X and Y variables to have kind of a random feature in your game. And so the first one that I'm going to show you is the set X, okay? Set X coordinate is what it's saying, right? And it's asking for a number here. But what, if you notice, actually you can do is you can use the word random, which is pretty cool. And it works differently than the forward command, it works pretty similar to what we did with the forward command in that when you type the word random, you can't just leave it random. You have to actually have a number interval next to it, okay? So one thing it's really important to note when you're building your game is what are the dimensions of your game? And when I say that, it's how do you think about the X versus Y axis? A really easy way that you can kind of learn about your project and just find out the sides really, really simply is you could press this down button here. And then when you click new project, you'll see that it actually shows you all the different heights, widths and heights that you're working with. So I know that technically this screen is 800 pixels across and 450 in terms of the height, right? So when I think about where this beautiful pixelated flower could go, I'm thinking that it could go anywhere from 0 to 800, right? Because I want it to basically move across this screen as this turtle is moving. So my random will be 800 to indicate that it can go anywhere across that line. The other thing that I think it's really important to note here is that we don't want our Y interval to be random. And the reason why is when we're setting on the X, it's basically changing this way. But when we set on the Y, we're going to be changing it this way. If this pixel goes up too high, this turtle and the jump that it has won't be able to touch it, right? So if I go up here and press jump, you can see my turtle doesn't jump nearly as high as it needs to in order to actually touch the pixelated kind of flower. So instead, I want to kind of put it nice and close enough that if it jumped and interacted, it would hit it on terms of the x-axis, or sorry, the y-axis. And so then the other thing I want to do is make sure that I know what that y number is. So I right-clicked on my snack turtle and I'm looking at my y correspondent, which is -99. Okay. So now that I've set X with random 800, I want to set Y. Right, set Y, and I put -99, because that's what it said on the Y. And then the last thing that I want to add here again, which we do often with our movements, is add that wait command. Make sure that every time this moves, that there's some sort of pause in between its next movement. And in order to do that, I again write wait. And for this one, I'm going to kind of put our weight much higher so that it stays in place longer than what we've seen in previous movements. I'll put it at 30, let's say. Again, close your procedure with that square bracket. And don't forget to write end at the end. Otherwise, it won't work. As always, we want to test our procedure, make sure that it was clicked, snack, movement, and press enter. And what you'll start to see now is that this beautiful pixelated flower starts to move across the x-axis randomly, right? It has that 30-second pause or that 30 wait time in between, but it's moving across that one line here, which is the Y, okay? Which enables me when I'm moving to essentially try and jump to get it, right? So if I jump over this guy and I jump over this guy, and then I want to hit that to gain a life. That's what I'm thinking. But we haven't made the gain a life procedure just yet. All we're doing is testing to make sure that our pixelated flower actually moves. So let's reset the game, of course, and we can keep our snack movement kind of random because it's going to appear. You could have it here to start. It's really up to you where you want it to start, but we know that it's going to move randomly. Right? So in order to add lives, we're going to follow something similar to the lose lives procedure, but instead of -1, we want to add 1. Okay? So to gain lives, then we're going to write set lives plus 1. Okay? right end at the end of it. And so what I can do, this one is not frozen, I'm just going to drag it here. Okay, and if I start and jump, should have hit it. Oh, I lost a life. Do this. Nope, it didn't. And that's because I haven't created the on touch procedure yet. That makes more sense. Okay, so in order for that to happen, I now have to modify my on touch procedure. So let's go back to our procedures pane and scroll down to where you see to pink touch. Notice that it says if member touch turtle equals enemies, we want to lose lives. So now we want to do the reverse. Okay, so we're going to switch it up and say if member, okay, touched turtle, and then next we want to call to that specific turtle, which is snack. Okay, you can always verify, just right click on your turtle. And you'll see that was the name snack. So I'm saying if the pink turtle touches snack, something's going to happen. And what do we think? Well, we've already created the procedure to gain lives. Okay, and you close it in like that. And now if this touches, you should see that my lives went up. We'll reset the game here. My lives are at 3. Okay. So just to test that out to make sure it's all working and running in my game, first I'll press save. Don't want to lose any of my lovely work. Then I'll press start. Now there's one thing you can see that I've missed in my procedure. It's obviously when the turtle interacts with the flower now, it's giving me a life. But what you don't see happening is the actual flower moving, which was the movement procedure we created just before this. So we need to add that somewhere. And if you're probably guessing, it needs to go in the begin game procedure, similar to where we added the blue turtle ones, the setup enemies that allowed the enemies to move. Now we want our snack to move. And if you recall, this was called snack movement. Now by doing that, once the begin game button is pressed, or the start button, I should say, with the begin game procedure, what we'll see happen is it starts to move. Then we can jump, and I can't get a life right now. It's not doing anything because it's just not in my run path at the moment. Ooh. Now I could cheat and press stop and jump, but I landed on a turtle. So instead, what we need to do is to kind of modify this a bit. Now, before I said that there should be a game over button when you reach 0 lives. What I've decided for this game is that if we can get up to a certain number of lives, then perhaps the game would be over and I win, right? So in order to do that, I want to modify my at lives procedure similar to the way that I did the lose lives procedure. So again, I'll go back to my game features tab, and you'll see if lives equals 0, stop all. I'm just going to copy this line because it makes it easier that I don't type it again. Now I don't want it to be 0. Of course, I'm going to put it as something higher, perhaps, like 7 lives. So what this is trying to say really is that if this turtle is able to jump up and touch this pixelated flower to the point where I gain 7 lives, the game will be over. I've won the game now. If, however, I interact or the pink turtle touches too many of the blue turtles, what's going to happen is this is going to drop down to 0, and once it's at 0, my game will be over. Now, the last thing I kind of want to show you in this webinar, before I leave it open to some questions and tell you a little bit about what next week will be, is something called an announcement. Now, some of you maybe haven't used announcements before, or perhaps you're used to it, but one way to just see the announcement in general, or the announce command, is to test it in the work area and the command center. So what I'll show you is the word announce. That is our command or our primitive. And you'll see that what's going to happen is an alert box is going to kind of pop up on my screen, or an old school pop-up box. And in order for that pop-up box to contain anything, I need to actually enclose it in square brackets and say something. So, announce, you lost, game over. Okay. Now when I press enter, you'll see, hopefully you can see there's a pop-up that's appeared that says announce, and it's all of the text that I actually wrote right next to these square brackets. So this is a really cool feature that I kind of want to have happen when the game is over, when they've reached 0 lives, because then that shows them you've lost. So I'm going to Command C, copy this. And what I'm going to do is actually add it to my lose lives procedure, right? So see where it says stop all. I don't want necessarily the game to stop before the announcement comes. Maybe the announcement should come first. So what I'm going to do is place it right here. Control V or Command V, depending on your keyboard. And so here it will execute this action when my lives are set to 0. Now, of course, if my lives get to 7, the game also stops. So the best thing to add here is another announcement that says, hooray, you won, or something to let your user know that they've completed the game, that they've reached the objective. And with that in mind, it's always important that when you're creating a game, you should probably have an instruction screen or a home screen that actually explains to the user how to actually work your game. Otherwise, they may be pressing buttons and trying to kind of figure it out on their own, which is fun to a certain degree, but everybody likes to kind of beat a game sometimes or figure out possible combinations that, you know, allow you to get more points, whatever the case may be. It's about figuring out kind of the game strategy and the things behind it. So make sure that when you're creating your own games, you also create a page that tells your user what it is they're going to be doing. So right over here, I'm going to paste my announcement again. Of course, you lost is not what I want it to say. It's kind of harsh. Instead, it's going to say, you won, hooray. Okay. Now I'm going to press save, and I think it would be cool to see if the announcement works when the turtle, you know, interacts. And I'll do it with the blue turtles for now, just to be quick. I can jump up, touch this one, jump up again, I got there. So you'll see that my pink turtle keeps moving. Can't do much now because he's far away from my blue turtles. I'll let it touch the blue one. Right. I'm not jumping on purpose to make this go a little bit faster, but you should see once these two interact shortly. Okay, so now what's happened is my lives have set to 0. I've lost the game. The announcement is here. Okay, and it kind of gives me a snapshot of how my game ended. And I can press reset game and I can begin again. So what I'll do is I'm going to save this here. Again, I'm just going to show you how you can access this template to kind of see the code that we worked on today. And then I'll kind of go over the last few points of what we'll cover next week. So if I go to all projects now, you should see it saved under week 2 game development, all of the progress that we made today in this webinar. And try playing it yourself and see if you can get to 7 lives quickly. Next week, what's really exciting for us is that I'm going to be showing you how to use an online editor that's similar to Photoshop, if you're familiar with Photoshop, to actually edit customized images. And it's not just images that you can use this for. So we talk about images as being, you know, a background image or the costume that the turtle wears. But sometimes we forget that the images we import into our projects can also act as buttons as well. And if you noticed in some of my older games, I create custom buttons that kind of look more attractive than the typical gray box. And that's really your preference as you start to kind of build out your game and adding these features and figuring out perhaps what you want your characters to do in your game. So I will stop it there. And if there is any questions that you guys have now or that you still want to know, please let me know now and I will answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. It was wonderful. It was great. I'm sure everyone has got a wonderful imagination about what they could do with the new techniques they learned today. So write something in the chat or grab a microphone if you want to, and Jennifer will stay on for a couple of minutes.